Hi, this is Bob Samuels from Tech Connector. As part of our ABM Leaders series and Candid with Bob, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Bret.
Bob, your frame froze, but I think you were about to introduce me.
I'm going to have to. All right. This is Bob Samuels from Tech Connector and the ABM Leaders Group, and I'm very happy to introduce you to Bret Smith from HIPB2B. How are you today, Bret?
I'm doing well, Bob. Thanks for having me, and hello, everybody.
This is very challenging times. How are you guys been doing these last couple months since the shutdown?
Well, it's been strange. We've been remote now for about 3 months and planning to return to the office in about another 4 weeks.
Yeah, and it seems like you were ahead of the curve there. You got shut down early, self-imposed, and then you've been dealing with things well. And how's business been?
Business has been pretty good. We've been fortunate in some sense that folks have pivoted some of their field and trade event budget over to demand gen, and that's what we specialize in.
Yeah, wonderful. So could you give, for those of the audience that don't know you as well as I do, can you give a little bit about your background, in particular about ABM and lead gen and so forth?
Sure. So I've been specifically leading HIPB2B for about 11 years now. Before that, I filled similar roles for other companies, some fairly notable ones like Pitney Bowes and so on. And that's where I first began to experiment with the use of email, actually in a sales role. And that led me down this particular path to the demand gen solution provider that HIPB2B is today.
Wonderful. I love your background. You've done a very good job of being very focused on what you do really, really well, which is email, B2B lead gen marketing, very specifically US. And you know, as far as I'm concerned, you're among the very tops of what you do and what you focus on. So it's
well, thank you. Yes, well, we put a lot of time and energy to it, literally.
Yeah. And you're expanding. You're looking at, or you are implementing multi-channel approach now to supplement along with email. So what is that looking like for you?
Well, it's been interesting. It started as a bit of an experiment, and we were actually the lab rats, if you will. So we've always used multi-channels to promote the company itself, including social media, where we have a pretty fair reach, LinkedIn specifically. But B2B display was something we had just experimented with on LinkedIn and had not really done that on behalf of clients. So as ABM has evolved and the market has become so crowded, the inbox is jammed, such competition for eyeballs, we began to look at how we could reach the earliest forms of demand sooner than we could necessarily do so by our core approach. And that led us to B2B display. It only led us there, though, because of ABM. And you and I, Bob, know that named accounts marketing's been around for a very long time. But ABM now is a touchstone for technology and approach and the sort of outcomes that are expected from marketers. You know, ABM at its core is basically driven by a list of companies or a list of domains, and that makes it the key. That makes it the bridge, if you will, between doing something like B2B display, where engagement is anonymous, to email marketing, where the contacts you're reaching out to are already known.
Very good. So I think you mentioned that display, getting into that, you're saying that it's an earlier touch as opposed to email? How does that work?
I would say it is, yes. I think people are more inclined, particularly if they are in a social network or in their familiar publication that offers ads, to click on an ad. And part of that, of course, is because while they've typically been cookied or their IP address has been captured, they aren't going to be filling out a form. They're going to be consuming some sort of content in a frictionless way. Now, as an individual pre-ABM, again, these people are basically unknown except by cookies. So unless they returned again and you progressively profiled, you couldn't learn a lot about them. But if it's driven by an ABM list, well, you then actually can see, you can connect the domain to the engagement. And the bridge then becomes taking those engaged domains and connecting them to the people that reside at those domains who are most likely to have generated that interest.
So making the switch from the lead, the individual, to the account, the group of individuals at that company, that lots of them can be touch points.
Exactly. And we all know that one of the biggest reasons why we have to get started so early and connect things in an integrated fashion is because we live in an age where most buying groups are self-educating. So they've done, a fairly frequently quoted percentage of 70% have done their homework, and they've probably engaged with 13 different vendors to the extent of consuming their content before they're ready to have a meaningful conversation with the salesperson. So getting them, capturing that awareness as early as possible, and then taking it from that earliest sign, basically starting with them at the beginning of their buyer journey, and converting that into an environment where we can touch them specifically via email and begin to nurture that interest, if you will, prior to commitment. That's key.
Okay. Now, when you say reach out to them, you don't know for sure if it's that person by email, but you can aim at that domain and aim at the titles that are relevant.
Yeah. So back in the day, everything was persona driven, right? So a persona would have been at the individual level, a job function, a job title, and then the company firmographics might have been a particular size of organization and their geographic location, et cetera, et cetera. So that same thing applies in ABM when you're trying to get to the contact. So knowing the domain, yes, you're right, it doesn't tell you who the individuals are, but matching the persona to that activity gets you a whole lot closer. And since we know that most buying decisions are made by groups now instead of individuals, it makes sense to reach out and touch all of those folks in what I call the circle of influence. And email is the perfect way to do it.
Beautiful. So one thing that it brings to mind, so the display works as a setup, if you will, to grease the skids or to make the email more effective when you reach out to them, because there will be some sort of awareness.
Awareness is absolutely part of it.
Yeah. And so that brings up the challenge of attribution, because it's not necessarily going to be attributed directly to any leads, but it has an indirect with the email in theory. And then it may get some of those early people to make action, but that's not the expectation, I guess.
Well, the study that I revolve all of my thinking around is the one that arrived at the conclusion that when you reached out to potential companies and their employees by multiple channels, the engagement level was 250% higher than that of a single channel. So I'm willing to take that nebulous brand awareness and work with it in a targeted fashion. So using an ABM list, for instance, in a B2B display environment, you're going to quickly be able to see which of those companies that you were interested in are betraying some sort of interest. At that point, we can take it and put it through our database, just as most companies can put it through their house database or a third party or even content syndication to accomplish a similar goal.
Very good. So, and you mentioned multi-channel. So those are two channels. There's other channels too, right? So there's
Absolutely.
social, there's some even and postal.
Absolutely. And I look at these all in terms of their relative cost to each other, right? So 250% engagement's fine, but the underlying cost to get there obviously matters. So what we have found in B2B display, for instance, if you compare it to social media, and by that I mean specific B2B social media, which in my mind right now is almost entirely, at least for technology, LinkedIn. There's an argument for Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're looking at CPM, if you're looking at cost per thousand between B2B display and something like LinkedIn, that differential can be almost 100% higher in social media. Direct mail, well, I think that speaks for itself. There's a great deal more involved there with printing and delivery and timing. You certainly don't have any sort of electronic indication that they even opened it if they don't respond to you.
Yeah, well, I'll be definitely interested in hearing, because I don't, the cost per thousand is one thing, which it's a factor, but at the end of the day, the cost per opportunity, if you will, is probably the best metric. And
Absolutely.
if we don't get past the cost per thousand number, then we'll never know how the other ones do. So I'm curious if you do test other channels, how those perform. And I'll do the same. If I'll share with you once I learn more, because I like your idea that the multi-channel approach, especially the way people are these days, with they're inundated with lots of different things all over the place, to be able to hit them with a nice consistent message, I assume,
Yep.
and a story, that it makes a lot of sense that the different touches help each other out. There's some synergies.
Yes. And we've always been strong proponents of content marketing. So when you say the word story, that means a lot to me in terms of how we execute. When I say join someone at the beginning of their customer journey, I want to do so in such a way that what I'm communicating to them is not transactional, it's not product specific. It's instead projecting thought leadership. It's indicating that there's expertise, there's credibility here. We don't expect instantaneous trust, of course, but we will build that over time. And once we've identified the interest, then email becomes the sort of natural and targeted way to pursue that.
That makes sense. So how do you go about deciding what personas to go after? That's something the client chooses, I guess, but you help them through that process.
It really depends upon the client. In fact, this might be a good spot for me to share sort of a tip and trick, if you will. A lot of folks are considering ABM these days, but there's a lot of levers to pull to get there, right? I mean, you've got to be well aligned with your sales organization. You've got to have a very good understanding of your CRM and which contacts were part of that buying group, and so on and so on. So a lot of people still struggle to put together an ABM list. And I can tell you that from our perspective, one of the best ways to leverage an ABM list is if there are domains provided to us that actually match the companies. And I say that for a reason, because people that are struggling to move into ABM, in my estimation, that's the first thing you want to do. Once you can match domains, now you have the ability to take that and move it into B2B display. Similarly, if you don't have an ABM list and you want to have a better idea of what the demand is out there in the ether, if you will, we can take a persona-based list, build domains from that, put that into the ad ecosystem, and winnow it down to get to your ABM list. Another one, what I mean specifically is, say you have 5,000 companies that come from a persona-based list. We run that through a B2B display ad network, and now we've determined that about 1,000 of them are actually demonstrating early interest. Well, now you've got your ABM list, and that answers your other question long-windedly, that's the 1,000 that we're going to go after via email. And maybe some subset of that based on their level of interest.
Very good. So then I guess you could do similar, something, combination where you can find lookalikes. They can tell you which ones they like, which are their favorite customers or prospects, and you can go find other companies that meet that similar persona.
Yes, it can really become very complex. One of our largest customers these last 2 or 3 years has had, I think, 8 separate personas, each with their own account list, and with varying pieces of content that cycle through that during the course of a year. It can be very complex, and so I guess I'd be doing a disservice in not saying that marketing automation is also very key to any of this to do it at scale, right? Without that, it's very difficult to deliver nurturing communication without in such a fashion that you can get outcomes that can be put to purpose.
Explain more about that. So you by definition feed all of your information into the client CRM.
Yes, we do that through an integration, and it can go directly into their CRM, or it can go into sort of a holding capacity while they do their own quality check. We can also pass lead scoring, and that's one of the things that a lot of companies do. Brands that have their own list, right? They begin to send communications, they begin to collect intelligence, and they have a scoring mechanism for determining as a marketer when it has reached the level that it should be passed off to an SDR. One of the advantages of importing leads from a third party who's already done some of this prior work, some of this nurture for you, is you can bring that particular status into your CRM. And that may shorten the sales cycle, right? Because it may be determined that you can push them to an SDR sooner, or you could send them a lower funnel piece of content like a case study instead of an infographic, and so on.
Very good.
But automation's key because most companies are trying to do this at scale. They're not looking for 1 or 2 opportunities. They're looking for hundreds of opportunities.
Right, and look for patterns and so forth.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, how often are you getting feedback from the clients about which leads worked for them, which they were able to nurture and become opportunities and so forth, so you can find others like that? Is that a pretty rare situation?
Feedback. No, feedback is almost continual. We pride ourselves at HIPB2B on our account management, so we keep those channels open. And we want to hear from clients whether something performs well or whether it doesn't perform well. But I'll tell you that the expectation I set and that our sales team set is that in this day and age, while there's low-hanging fruit, nurture is absolutely crucial. The average person will open 8 to 13 pieces of communication from you over a 2 to 6 month period before they will necessarily engage. Our job is to cut the lower third of the effort off, right? So to take the tools they give us, identify demand, qualify them, ensure that the quality that we pass through is solid, right? Every aspect of that contact record, so that it can be readily imported into a CRM or a marketing automation platform. And then the work begins. That's not the end of the job, right? That's not when you pass it to an SDR, but rather when you begin to nurture them to some status that you can close business with them.
So you have to manage the expectations of the client, because if the client thinks those very, very top of the funnel hand raisers are ready to be called on, they'll be disappointed. And some will work. Yep. Overall, they're not ready to be called on.
Right, right. And consumers have become very adept at avoiding these sorts of things, right? I'm old enough to remember when voicemail was not all that prevalent, and I don't remember the last time I took a live call. I use voicemail very effectively for screening. It's the same with email or any other communications. We are all inundated with information. So it has to be something that cuts through, and it has to be meaningful, and it has to be targeted.
Yes. And so if I recall, and maybe your memory is better, if your statistics from 10 years ago, or industry statistics, the opens and clicks and so forth were much higher than now because
Yes.
it was more novel, I guess. And now they're getting inundated with lots of different competition.
Yeah. Yeah, you're touching on one of my favorite topics, which is the topic of marketing best practices, right? So, yes, back in the day, before email was accepted in the B2B environment as a good way to identify demand and start opportunities, it was far easier to get the job done. Good example is webinars. We used to be able to get, I am not kidding you, 1,200 people to attend a webinar for a client. It wasn't because we realigned the planets, we just did our jobs. Now you can pull those levers and many more, and you might be fortunate to register a few hundred. And then there's the whole aspect of who attends. But what I wanted to say about best practices is this. I think there are best practices that we all should follow. Recency, frequency, et cetera, et cetera. But there are some things that become counterproductive for us. And one of these is the notion that there's a certain day of the week that is best to send at a certain time on that day. Well, yeah, that's great when no one else is doing it, but when everybody's doing it, nobody's getting outcomes.
Yeah.
So I watch trends to see not just what might be the next cool thing we want to try, but I watch trends also to identify how we can sometimes make contrarian decisions and go another way. Our best engagement to this pre-pandemic was on a Saturday.
Yeah, because no one else is there.
Mm-hmm.
So that, yeah, I remember I forgot, they said that, maybe Friday afternoons or whatever, that was a really weak, the good time. And then all of a sudden everybody did that and then it became worse. So much for that. So self-fulfilling. So what other best practices do you have to share? I bet a lot of people think that email marketing is email marketing. You put together a message, you put together a list, you send out the message, you get so many responses, yay team. How are you different than other email marketing companies?
Well, I could tell you I give you a lot of answers to the second part of your question. The first part I would say is that email marketing is extremely complex if done well. And that's because it is rife with the risk of destroying brand equity to eliminating your own ability to get an email to an inbox. We have an entire operations team that's constantly working with data quality. And we are constantly looking at what domains are engaging with us and aren't engaging with us. A best practice, I would say, is making sure that whatever ESP you're using, right, or marketing automation platform you're using is not just a tool. You need folks who can advise you and can advocate on your part, particularly if you're an agency. Very important to have that strategic relationship. The thing about recency and frequency as a best practice we should all follow is that relates directly to deliverability. And that goes back to what we're constantly working with here at HIP to ensure that we maintain optimally, right? Because you cannot solve for the network intrusion vendors out there who are making decisions about what is credible email, defining what is spam, what is not spam, and so on. And it's your behavior ultimately as a marketer that determines that, the decisions that they make. So for instance, if you have a list with an ABM list of say 200, and you have maybe 10,000 people that match that because say it's an enterprise, they're all enterprise companies. Very unwise to take that as a single group and start broadcasting to them, because what will happen is when IBM says, oh, this little marketer just delivered 100 emails to us in the past 60 seconds, you're not going to have that level of access the next time around. They're also very automated as well. So it does, particularly in the United States, where it's not permission or consent based. Behavior is even more important to show that you are credible, that you are bringing valuable content to them, and you're doing it in a way that's respectful of their time.
Very good. So getting back to the coordination with sales and marketing, that's one of the reasons why I like ABM, is that it gets everybody on the same song sheet in theory. That, instead of just getting leads from the marketing team, but marketing team can focus on the ones that are high value for the sales, which is nice. And it's nice to know what you're aiming at. So one of the questions from our audience was, do you consider ABM a sales tactic or a marketing endeavor?
That's a good question. ABM, by definition, is driven by a list of named accounts. If you are a salesperson and you have the ability to use your email intelligently and use social media channels and so on, then why wouldn't you do some of your own prospecting? But this is where alignment is key, because marketing typically is the department that defines how the message is communicated. So that the alignment is so important, so that when a salesperson takes it upon themselves to delve into an account rather than wait for a scored lead to arrive from marketing, they have to be saying the same thing in the same way, while also breathing a little personality into it.
Yeah, very good. So the answer to the question is it a sales tactic or marketing endeavor? It's both.
Yeah, I think it really is. Logically, it would be, right? I mean, that you can't operate in silos. First of all, in ABM, you have to have buy-in from the sales organization to have such a list. Then the next thing in terms of alignment with sales is to set proper expectations. So great, we have a list, we're going to go out, we're going to promote it, we're going to get people who are going to fill out a form. Okay, but we're not going to just send people to you because they committed that single act of completing a form. That is not sufficient score. That does not indicate more than necessarily a passing interest. So sales has to realize that it does take time to nurture them, and it's in their best interest for that to happen.
Another plug for that nurturing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a process.
Well, that's the big challenge I think a lot of companies find. If you have the sufficient budget to do marketing automation, putting ABM into practice is just really aligning with sales and just building out a proper strategy to undertake that. But to nurture, you have to have content also. So it can't just be a white paper. There has to be other things of value that can be communicated to that prospect until such time as they've engaged enough for them to be ready for sales.
Yeah. So, yeah, very good, very good. As far as signals goes, so I guess you rely sometimes on knowing that maybe there's some people in your list of folks that you've contacted in the past that have shown an interest in a product. So you may choose to message them and see if they're interested in the new client. So my point is, do you have signals or intent indicators of who you might want to go after first or as a priority?
Right. Well, we do maintain information that we call behavior rather than intent. We also work with lots of brands that are, leveraging other providers that specialize in capturing web signals and sending over to us those that are indicating intent in a certain period of time. But yes, HIPB2B has had a large database for a long time. We send many, many millions of emails a year. Any engagement that happens with that is tied not just to the campaign and the brand, but it's also tied to keywords. And those keywords also are linked to recency and frequency. You know, when did that happen? How long ago did we send it to them, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, we do have, again, what we call behavior, and that can be an indicator of intent, without a doubt.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. Behavior arguably is more than, it's pretty valuable versus just general. Again, I call it all signals. It's just an indicator of something. Nothing's perfect, but it can increase the probabilities that you're sending the right message to them or the right timing, I guess.
Yes.
Is an important thing.
Yes. And it also helps to make a determination whether you send anything at all.
Right.
Sending to people who don't engage is actually a very poor practice. You know, continuing to do that over time will destroy your IP reputation and make it very hard to get any of your emails delivered.
Right. So in this whole outreach, you've already addressed the who you reach out to, which is the personas at those target accounts and so forth. So that's the who. The what you want to send is the messaging, I guess, and I would assume that the clients typically will present you their messaging they want, and you may make it so that it works well in the medium that you're using, either email or display.
Yeah, it's a little different for us as an agency than it is for a brand, particularly when we work in like a syndication atmosphere where there could be multiple other partners that are promoting that same asset for that brand. So our approach, when allowed, because sometimes we are compelled to follow an abstract, is to both write original copy as well as do original and responsive design. And the reason for that is that, because we all know that there's overlap in our databases, if someone or some company, particularly on an ABM list, are going to be receiving the same content from, a dozen different partners, that's problematic for all of us, up to and including the brand equity of the company that wants us to do this for them. So we differentiate that by trying to create a different UX for the recipient.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. So another question from our audience. Thank you, guys. Thank you all. So do you offer personalized ads and personalized websites, or are they required from the client?
Well, that's a good question. I want to make sure I fully understand that. So we don't design websites for clients. What we do, however, is we'll take a piece of content provided to us, and for purposes of this, we'll call it an ebook. And we will write what we call derived content. So that's the textual part of it. That is going to be part of the email and part of a landing page. Of course, we will completely align with the brand guidelines of that client. But yes, at the end of the day, the brand is not doing the design, nor are they hosting it. They're simply providing us the messaging that we can then place within our little ecosystem, and then we match those in our database to their specifications, whether it's a persona, whether it's an ABM.
Right, and so you take it, you'll design the message based on the content, like I said, derived from it, and the landing page and the whole user experience.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I'm a big fan of disruptive subject lines as well. And disruptive is, air quote kind of a word, but even when you're delivering to an IT audience, which is a very big part of who we are delivering to on behalf of brands, I think everybody has a sense of humor. I mean, at the end of the day, we are selling to human beings, right? We're not selling to a laptop or an email client. So a little bit of humor, a little bit of mystery sometimes can go a long way. And that's one thing that we also try to focus on. And I think that's the best practice. You just have to be very careful to do something that is going to communicate a message without putting someone off.
I love it. So what are some of your favorite subject lines?
Well, a question is always my favorite subject line. And short of that, something that starts with how to usually gets people's attention. I also enjoy being a little bit coy, saying something that seems like not quite the direction we're going with the message, but there's enough of something in the subject line that they know it's meant for them. That's the mystery part, right?
So pique their interest.
Yes. What lies within?
Yeah.
Can't know until you click.
So how deep do you go in your testing of a subject line? Will you test to see not just whether its job is to get opens, right? And then the message takes over.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the key measurement is opens. And then the other question maybe is, are you getting the right people? So you may get lots of opens, but they're not the target. And the real target people, they're responsive to a different subject line, a lower open rate, but they're the right people. So
Yes.
the qualitative aspects, besides the quantitative aspects of the audience that's being attracted by or being a successful interaction with.
Yes.
So it could be key. Let's see what else we got here. Okay.
Lots of good questions.
Yeah, keep them coming. Keep them coming. So how often do you reach out to people? Will you send them one message and stop?
Oh, that's very rare. That's one of those holy grail campaigns where you're one and done. Generally speaking, we'll have a certain amount of leads that we need to fulfill. And as I mentioned, regardless of the size of the corresponding target group, we have to break it apart for purposes of protecting our deliverability, our IP reputations, and so on. So it usually takes longer. Clearly, we're not going to hammer on people. That's not in our best interest, and it's not a good practice in terms of how the brand you're representing is being treated. So I would say a typical campaign could be 4 broadcasts over maybe a month. So not overly intrusive, but certainly part of all that noise in everyone's inbox. And that's why targeting, I think, is very important, and paying a little bit more attention to the content. You asked me about subject lines. So kudos to our creative team, because our creative team is charged with doing this. And so with a typical campaign, we're going to have maybe 4 subject lines of different types, right? So there might be a question, there might be a statement, there might be one that's personalized to a first name or a company name, and we'll test those, on a small portion of the audience. The one that performs the best is the one that then goes to market. And that's also an important feature when you're looking at an ESP, an email service provider, or marketing automation tool, is that they have that ability to support intelligent ABM. Intelligent A/B testing.
A/B testing, yeah. Got our TLAs mixed up. So, okay. So, what do you, other pieces of the deliverability and keeping people out of trouble. So, how I know you're focused on US, so you get to avoid CASL and GDPR.
Yes.
But you're going to need to deal with CCPA. So, what do you see as the challenges around that?
Well, if you asked me that question 2 years ago, Bob, I would say I'm very, very concerned. But my first counsel to anybody who asks me that question is do your homework. And do your homework doesn't mean just do it by self-education. Talk to an attorney, talk to someone who specializes in this particular area. Read the actual legislation yourself. So CCPA as an email marketer, to me, is not of great concern, provided we are prepared to comply properly. Now, CCPA for an email marketer, particularly in B2B, is pretty narrowly focused, really, right? So folks have to have a way to opt out. That's required by CAN-SPAM. And exceeding a best practice or exceeding a federal guideline is also a good practice too. You have 10 days to unsubscribe people. We do it instantaneously. But with CCPA, that's a little more complicated because the recipient can ask to be forgotten, which means they have to be removed from your database. They can ask to have provided to them all information that you may have on them. You're legally bound to do that. So a simple link doesn't work. What we did is we ultimately went with a privacy compliance management company. And so they integrate to our privacy policy page. And if someone wants to be forgotten or someone doesn't want us to sell their data, when they click, they're actually going to that portal set up for us. The nice thing about it is it can intake that request in an automated fashion, and it's also documented. And then the last piece, which I was sharing with you yesterday, and I don't know how many people on our call know this, but CCPA, while it's really touted as being consumer friendly, from the marketer's standpoint, we have a legal requirement to ensure that the person making the request to be forgotten or whatever is who they say they are. And in order to do that, the law prescribes that we ask for identification, typically something like a driver's license and so on. So the absurdity of it all is, in order for us to legally take action on a CCPA request, we have to ask them for more information than we already had on them. And I think that's probably pretty discouraging to a lot of folks.
Yeah, and especially since they don't trust you to begin with, because that's what they do. Yeah,
but
so
it is a much bigger deal for those that are in the display advertising world, without a doubt.
Well, we have some folks that are GDPR or privacy experts and consultants in our ABM leaders group, and so I'll be talking to them about CCPA, and I'll get verification of that, because that's definitely a
good. Yep.
Yeah. So have another question from our audience. Thank you very much. It says, what kind of information would a client receive once a campaign is completed? And completed in quotes.
Okay, it can be a variety of things. Typically, it's going to be business card information and company firmographics. If they wanted a custom question, we'll have the answers to those custom questions. Other information that we can append to that would be, say, a LinkedIn profile or a direct dial or an extension, something of that nature. The way we do that is internally. It's not farmed out. We do everything in-house. And it's part of what we call our data quality approach, and specifically our contact verification unit. A lot of folks don't realize this. When they give you a list of domains and they ask you to go market to them, of course we're going to build a target group from our database, but our database has 28 million records in it. It's virtually impossible to keep every record up to snuff constantly when the churn is about 2% a month, just based on people changing employment or retiring or passing or whatever. So we build the target group. It's the best information that we typically have. We usually have prior engagement or behavior data to support that. But once we start capturing engagement, before we deliver it to the client, it goes through this contact verification unit. And their job is not to call the prospect. It is not to ask custom questions. It's not tele-verification. All they're doing really is ensuring, perhaps through a gatekeeper or through an automated system or through social media, that we have the most information that's up to date for this person. We know the email address was deliverable, right? Presumably it was well targeted because they responded, they filled out a form, whatever it is they did, but their title may be different. Their phone number could have changed. We certainly don't have their LinkedIn profile unless we bring it into the record. So to me, that data quality piece is one of the cornerstones of what we do, ensuring that if I was making a sales call, that not only do you have one channel by which you can reach out to these people, and that's email, because that's how we captured the demand, but you also have a phone number, an address, and a social media profile where you can put a multi-channel approach to work.
Very good. So let's talk about budget a little bit. And I imagine it depends on the, each individual client, their call to action, their brand awareness to begin with.
Yep.
Lots of things. So if they want to end up with, let's say they want end up with 100 sales opportunities. If they were to work their way backwards, how many leads would they have to nurture to get there? How many leads would you have to be able to deliver to them? How many display ads would they need to have to show to be able to get so many leads to be able to nurture for you to nurture with email?
I wish that was a one size answer. One question answers all, because it really isn't. There's so much that goes into the calculus of that. Obviously, in the email realm, we know what open rates are, we know what click-through rates are, we know form completion rates, form abandonment rates, etc. But there are other things that go into this. You mentioned brand. An unknown brand it's much more difficult to get qualified interest from a brand that is not that well known. But other things play into this as well, including sales cycle, including the sales budget, the goals that they have. A client can tell us what they want. Do they want a marketing qualified lead? Do they want a sales qualified lead? And we have various approaches, levers, and means to bring about some of that, yes. But at the end of the day, say something like a truly Bant campaign, that, in my view, requires a minimum of 2 channels.
Okay, now I'm going to want you to explain some of those terms that you mentioned. So you've got marketing qualified lead, you've got sales qualified lead,
Yep.
You have HQL, highly qualified lead, you have a sales opportunities, you sales accepted lead, and you have Bant. So what are all those things, and how do you define them? How do you differentiate them?
Well, we actually just put out a blog post. It could have been yesterday or the day before that actually talks about 4 of those and how they differentiate.
I'll add some referral links for that.
But yeah, absolutely. Each of them basically is different in terms of the outcome that's expected, right? So a marketing qualified lead means that we deliver to them what was specified in the insertion order that matches their, the firmographics, the job function, et cetera, but it is not ready to go to sales, all right?
You just have a level of interest.
Exactly.
In the topic, in that asset, yes. Whatever. It's just interest. There's no intent.
Well, folks would argue that completing a form does indicate intent. And I would say 10 years ago, that's absolutely correct. Today, I would say people are going to fill out a form, regardless of their level of interest, if they want to read the asset. Doesn't mean they have budget or that they're ready yet to buy. A sales qualified lead is different, but SQLs more typically come from within the brand itself. We'll deliver an MQL, they'll nurture. At some point, it attains a lead score, and now it's sales qualified, and it's something that sales will accept as a lead that is ready for them to start working with.
Good. So by definition, you're not asked to deliver sales qualified leads.
Oh, we're asked all the time. Yes, yes, absolutely. I'm always mystified sometimes by some of the requests we get. A good one would be a request to only want C-level respondents from companies that have over $1 billion in revenue.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so they could ask for it.
You could absolutely ask for it. And there's a couple of answers here. I mean, and one of them is, I realize that is ideally what you would like, but we can't get you there. We can get you to the circle of influence around them. And that's really more reflective of how decisions are made today. A C-level executive may sign off on something, but you can bet they're not doing vendor qualification. They're not sitting through demos. They're not making decisions at that level. So it's very important to reach the folks that are around them. Sometimes you can convince a client otherwise, and sometimes they don't become a client.
So you mentioned BANTs. Explain what that is, and are you asked to deliver those, and how well are you able to? Because my understanding is with email, you get a lot of eeny, meeny, miny, mo answers, and not necessarily.
Yeah, BANT is always a special challenge. My response has always been that it's much more difficult to accomplish that strictly by email without some sort of other channel, particularly phoning. But we are asked to do it. And I would say that the key there, if we're going to try to accomplish it purely by email, is it has to be an extremely well-known brand, right? Because folks are only going to give up so much information if the one asking for that information is highly credible. So and to be honest, large brands who want BANT outcomes usually pay very well also, whereas a smaller company typically will have a smaller budget, and the economics don't work for any of us.
So they can ask for it.
They can ask for it. At the end of the day, though, BANT is, in my view, it's just not realistic. It's not reflective of what the current buying universe looks like, which is about self-education. It's about credibility and trust built over a nurture cycle. It's about scoring people and ensuring that you're not handing someone who just had minimal interest to a sales rep. Because in doing that, not only are they just burning up that lead, but they're also very likely closing that door permanently with that prospect. It's not a good move for anyone. So BANT can be done, yes, but it has to be a very large, very credible brand in my view.
Yeah. So you've got some education on your hands as far as setting expectations for your clients to make sure they realize what you can and cannot deliver.
Yes. And unfortunately, if you're taking the long view, which means looking after your own agency's reputation, you sometimes just have to say, no, I can't do it. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. You could do a lot of things with email that you can't get accomplished now without a great deal more work. And it just becomes a point at which that the economics don't work. They either don't work for the client or they don't work for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you're doing a service by pushing back and making sure that they understand exactly what they can.
Sometimes no is the best answer. I like to call it no, but. Which kind of goes back to what I was saying before, which is no, I can't get you C-level executives at billion-dollar companies, but if you're willing to listen to what we can accomplish in this regard and begin that journey to the C-suite, that we can do.
Yeah. We have another question.
Okay.
Do I have to buy new tech or software to implement receive leads or ABM results?
If I understand the question correctly, if we had a mission to fulfill a campaign and deliver a certain number of leads, the minimum technology that would be needed would be a spreadsheet. We can pass leads in a CSV if we need to. Most clients that we work with tend to be enterprise technology providers. Most all of them have CRM. Most of them have an investment in marketing automation. And a lot of them want you to deliver your leads through an API, which means our system has to talk to their system. And for that, we use, there's a couple of different platforms out there that exist for that very purpose. And we can work with all of them. So the answer to the question is No, a computer and a spreadsheet program. But if you're going to be taking delivery of leads at scale, and you really want to be able to nurture them and get to the true value that lies within them, then an investment, at least in some marketing automation, and that's not that expensive, by the way. There are some out there that are relatively nominal that can get the job done for you.
What are some of those that you're referring to?
Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is HubSpot. HubSpot is very well thought of. If you are under a certain number of users or a certain number of contacts, it can be nearly free. That's a good one to work with. And then there's ESPs out there, right? So email service providers that can fulfill some of this stuff for you. A lot of people have heard of MailChimp. They're fairly inexpensive, but there's a lot out there. Yeah.
Good. And as far as so I'm trying to think, so how have things, things have changed a lot in these past 10, 11 years you've been around. What is your vision? What is your crystal ball say about how things are evolving? What are we going to be talking about next year? What do we talk about in 5 years from now, as far as ABM, as far as the technology, the privacy, the challenges, the opportunities? What's going on?
I have an answer to that. I'll qualify it by saying, I have an idea of what we'll be talking about. Whether or not it should be what we're talking about is a whole nother matter. AI is absolutely something that folks are going to continue to look at more closely and try to bring into the marketing process. And yes, you absolutely need technology for that. Video marketing, we've been hearing that, this is its year for, I think, probably 5 years now. And I think we're going to continue to hear it this year. And the pandemic may be one of those things that, kind of makes the use of video for those purposes, more widespread. People talk a lot about personalization. Personalization could take a lot of forms, right? That can be as simple as using a mail merge command to put a first name or a company name in an email, up to the information that you collect about people that indicates, an image that is contained inside a message you send them. I think personalization makes a lot of sense, but yeah, it also has to be authentic. And it's very hard to communicate with individuals authentically at scale, regardless of personalization. I'll share this with you, that usually when we do A/B tests and we have, say, 4 subject lines, and one of them is personalized with a first name, it performs the least well of all 4.
Least well.
Yep.
That was one of the hot things early on.
Yes.
Right, and then it's either because it's spooky or because it's so yesterday.
Yep.
But
I think you're also going to see more community-based marketing. So if you think about it, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, they're all communities, right? You can fully communicate within them without having to do anything outside of it. And there's a lot of companies out there that are starting to do that very thing around their brand, or there's agencies that are building that around certain topic areas. And there's media companies that have done this for years, and they get very good outcomes. We have a small example on LinkedIn. We have a group that we manage, has about 8,000 members, but the thing with the community is to ensure that it functions as a community, right? And that requires curation. It requires management. It's going to be interesting to see how that can be brought about. The other thing that we're going to continue to talk about is privacy. To what extent are we willing to provide information, and to what extent should the government be involved in determining what companies can and can't do? And, that has been a leading topic for some years now. That's the whole reason for GDPR. That's the whole reason for CCPA. And, my personal opinion on that is that all of us in this ecosystem,
that are communicating with consumers, whether they're B2B or B2C, is we need to behave in a way that makes people comfortable with that. It's, you know, they always talk about the bad apple in a barrel. It's the same thing here. It's a few bad actors that make us all look bad. And the ultimate outcome for that is there's government legislation that we all have to abide by, and it becomes another cost of business, and it becomes another obstacle to getting your job done.
Yeah, but if it weeds out some of the bad apples, then your messages can come across better, ideally. Okay. So I'm happy to have you in our marketplace.
Thank you.
You're very good at what you do. I think it's great. You're part of what makes our marketplace successful, is that we work with the best of breed at, you know, whatever they do best. You're not telemarketing. We work with different telemarketing folks. You're not social. We work with the social people. So that's the idea of Tech Connector. So, you know, I appreciate your being part of our marketplace.
Well, thank you. We're happy to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we had a chance to get together today and talk with a few folks.
Yeah, it's been very good. I appreciate it. Any other words of wisdom? Or so, you know, getting back to the main topic, because I do like the premise of combining, you know, the multi-channel, the email and display. What's the next step if people want to explore that? How does that work, or what do you recommend, or what would be a next step?
Well, if you're going to self-educate, there's a lot of ways to do it. If it sounds interesting enough that you have budget, well, I'm very much available, as is my sales team, to discuss it further. You know, we are very interested in continuing to build use cases around the use of B2B display to capture the earliest form of demand, and then leveraging those outcomes via email to get highly qualified leads for our marketers.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, this has been great, Brett. So any other words of wisdom before I let you go?
No, I think I'm spent. I don't think I have anything else wise to say today. But I do bid everybody a very good afternoon or morning, depending upon where they are. And let's hope we are all in a brighter world in a very short period of time.
Very good. Well, it's a pleasure, Brett, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Bob. You as
you.
well.
Bye.
Goodbye.